500 to 700 nanometers are the wavelengths of red light. Humans can see only a tiny fraction of electromagnetic radiation. Electromagnetic radiation with basically from one end microwave to gamma radiation and radar. And people can only see a tiny fraction of it. We call it color. Sure, there are some animals and some insects especially that can see more colors, but we cannot see or describe these colors because we cannot see these colors. That's the topic of this video. Today is the topic color. Colors are everywhere. Colors are very important when you want to color grade, when you want to make a video. Colors create a mood and colors make the video beautiful. And if you're a video creator and you want to have a very vibrant video, you can just use the color wheel and pull the saturation to maximum and then you have a pretty colorful video. Have you really? Is it the most colors you can get? The first thing that comes in your mind when you want to color grade is a flat color profile. For me, this is often wrong. Sure, a flat color profile can be useful when you're using 8-bit footage, when you're beginning to color grade, but today's topic is how to get the maximum color out of your camera, because you have purchased an expensive camera, maybe the Lumix S5 Mark II or the Lumix S5 Mark II X. There's only one color profile to choose when you want to have the maximum amount of colors in your camera. That's not Vlog in my opinion, it's HLG. HLG stands for Hybrid Log Gamma. It's a standard color profile which is developed by the BBC. It's for broadcasting HDR content, but it's also capable of becoming an Rec. 709 color profile. How does this work? What is this? HLG, Hybrid Log Gamma, is a high dynamic range color codec. It's designed for broadcast, for instance, television and video distribution. It was developed by the British corporation BBC and the Japanese broadcasting corporation NHK. It's a backwards compatible HDR format that can be received and displayed in both standard dynamic range, so SDR and HDR devices. The primary goal of HLG is to provide a single HDR format that can easily be integrated into existing broadcast workflows without requiring separate standard dynamic range and high dynamic range production paths. That means that content produced in HLG can be viewed on traditional SDR televisions and also on HDR-capable displays without the need for conversion or additional metadata. HDR10, for instance, which is nowadays often used by Netflix and Disney Plus, needs a lot of metadata. HLG achieves the compatibility to utilizing a hybrid gamma curve. In traditional gamma encoding, the transfer function maps the input signal to the output luminance in a fixed and permanent manner. However, HLG employs the logarithmic gamma curve for the lower luminance levels, similar to the traditional gamma encoding, and a linear gamma curve for the higher luminance levels. By combining these two gamma curves, HLG can preserve details and colors in both the shadows and the highlights, showing for the wider dynamic range. That ensures an HLG encoded content looks good on HDR displays and also takes advantage of the capabilities of HDR displays. Furthermore, HLG incorporates a signaling mechanism that allows devices to recognize and handle the content appropriately. When an HLG signal is detected, an SDR display can simply apply the traditional gamma curve, that's in the Rec. 709 signal, while an HDR display can interpret the HLG format in an HDR signal and can render then in a high dynamic range video. HLG is a versatile HDR color codec that enables broadcasters and content creators to deliver HDR content to a wide range of devices without the need for a separate SDR or HDR production. What have we learned now with all this knowledge about HLG and everything? Can we now be the best colorist in the world? I mean, we need a powerful camera for HLG. HLG has a requirement of a 10-bit colors, and 10-bit is basically more colors than 8-bit. You cannot transform 8-bit material to an HDR signal, that's not possible. You need a billion colors. Colors which are then enriched in HDR, which are a little bit brighter than a normal Rec 709 look, and gives you a wider color range. I mean, this topic is a very huge topic. I could talk about this for hours, 8-bit and 10-bit and color spaces, and I'm sure you've seen some videos about color spaces. 99% or more of the videos you've seen on YouTube are mostly in the Rec 709 color space. That's an 8-bit color space, and that's basically what you see all the time. But when you then type in HDR Iceland, for instance, and you see these brilliant colors, these brilliant videos often shoot in 50 or 60 FPS, then like these videos you see on these televisions when you are in a television shop or something and you see these ultra bright videos, and you come home and see a pretty flat video with a dumb signal, and that's it. Then you have your basically the wrong television? No. If you have an HDR monitor, then try to see some HDR content now. Google HDR or look on my HDR video. I made several. And in easy terms, what is HLG good for? What is it used for, and how can you use HLG? HLG is often used as some normal standard color profile. It gives your camera not more dynamic range. It gives your camera not some magic capabilities to see more details in the highlights or in the shadows. That's completely nonsense. HLG gives your camera basically a 10-bit curve that can interpret it be as an HDR content. HDR content is much brighter than normal standard dynamic range content. And you know what is not possible with HDR. As a next step, I want to show you how you set up your monitor, how to see HDR, and how to color grade HDR. That's not possible with a screen recording, at least not in this video. Maybe subscribe to my channel or watch the next video if you want to see a color grading tutorial, but not in HDR in Rec 709, because I cannot record my screen in HDR. That's, I think, not possible yet. So, welcome to an old school screen recording video. So welcome to my old school screen recording. If you have a display and you want to set up for HDR content, you hit, if you have Windows 11 or Windows 10, right click, settings, and you enable basically just use HDR. My screen is in German because I am from Germany and we will ask the questions. You enable then basically HDR. This is SDR, looks a little bit different, and on HDR it looks like this. And if you want to then calibrate also your screen, you have a Windows calibration tool, a Windows HDR calibration tool. You can access it via the Microsoft Store, look for HDR calibration, then you can download this tool, and that's a very powerful tool, very handy. And it works like this, that you set up your monitor to the maximum black level till you cannot see anymore this window, and to the maximum white level till this window is completely white. And in the next step, the window must be completely disappeared. My level here is around 500 something, almost 600. And then you get asked if you want to have a very color-rich picture that doesn't change any settings, it just is a little bit more saturation, which I like. Then you can give this color profile a name, then you hit done and OK, and now your screen is calibrated to HDR. Now my screen has a maximum nits of like 550-ish. That's a 10-bit HDR 500 nits display. And when you then are in Vegas, I have here some little HDR clips from Berlin and from Iceland, which I think are pretty interesting, and I might upload them to a Google Drive folder, which you can then access and maybe play around with some footage and even some more footage. And now I want to take this clip. Let's say this clip that's from the DJI RS2 drone, which can record in HLG up to 5 point something K. Vegas asks you then If you want to change the project settings to the correct media settings, then you hit yes. And that changes only the resolution and frame rate. That changes not the display to HDR, because HDR is not enabled here. You hit on this little icon here. And then you change your HDR mode to HLG. In this case, you have then changed your settings to HLG, and when you hit then preview in HLG, the whites look a little bit off here and looks a little bit strange, because I recommend you to transform your color space to Rec 2020 ST2084 1000 nits, hit apply, hit OK, and now you have a better HDR conversion that fits my screen. You may have to change these settings to your screen, but now you have an HDR preview, and which is pretty cool. That uses a lot of resources on your GPU or on your CPU, maybe both. The preview in HDR looks more color rich, brighter, etc. as you can see here. The preview sometimes a little bit laggy. I recommend you to work with proxies when you work with HDR content, because that's very demanding. But I can tell you, it looks amazing. Color grading in HDR, little tutorial here. I will make a special tutorial about this. When you hit then color grading and you mess around with the color curves here, then your image gets destroyed. Watch what happens here on the luminance spot metering. Boom. Your image is then completely destroyed. It clips out the highlights at 100 nits. I think this is not enabled for HDR grading. That's a little bug. Still in Vegas 19. I don't know if it's in Vegas 20, maybe. And here does it work. Here can you now change the values. As you have seen here, your max calendar, also max brightness and max black level, is then from 0 to 1000, and in Vegas basically to up to 20,000 or something here. And that's ultra bright. Usually the most brightest screens which are available are like maximum 1000 nits or 1200 nits or something. Most 4K televisions are 700 around nits, and laptop monitors are not so bright usually. And so here you then can change everything, make ultra cool HDR color corrections. Why limit something? Why cripple your camera? Your camera is a beautiful tool. When you can record in 10-bit, you can record in a billion colors. And why you want to cripple it down to only 16 million colors? The camera can deliver in the Rec 2020 color space. And why not use the Rec 2020 color space? In my opinion, is it at least more than time for using normal videos in HDR, and maybe I upload more HDR content in the future, because I think it looks super amazing. I'm an ultra huge fan of HDR content, 10-bit delivery. It needs more space, more computer power. It's hard to work with this footage, but it looks, in my opinion, so much better. When you watch some HDR videos on YouTube, make sure the icon says, where you choose the resolution, it says really HDR. If it's not saying HDR, that's not a real HDR video. If you have an HDR television, it should give you then sometimes in the screen corner, boom, HDR content, and it changes then the screen accordingly, because there's a lot of fake videos apparently out there. When you then Google 12K HDR Iceland video, blah blah blah, that's mostly not an HDR video. Sometimes is it only upscaled stock footage in 8-bit. And if you want to watch some real HDR videos, I link it down in the description, as well as maybe the Google Drive folder, which some HDR footage, which what I made. I have a whole, I have almost 600 gigabyte of HDR footage from Iceland, which is pretty amazing in my opinion. And Yeah, I hope you liked this little tutorial about HDR, and if you want to see more of my content, then subscribe to my channel. My name is Paul, and see you in the next video.